Good morning, everyone. How are we doing, Lisa? For people, are they ready to start? Shall we start, everyone? Okay, good. Hello, everyone. My name is Jude Hillary. I'm the principal investigator for the Youth Transitions Community Catalyst project. Welcome to our launch event today. Very warm welcome to you all. We're very excited to be launching the ADR England Research Community Catalyst Youth Transitions project today, and we're thrilled you can all join us. So this community is for individuals and organizations who are invested in youth transitions, and we're very excited to have such a diverse group with us. As part of this community, you'll gain access to resources like our data navigation tool, which we'll tell you about later, research, training, and conferences. And you'll also get to learn much more about these in the next couple of hours. Before we make a start, just a few housekeeping notes, if I can start with. So today's main session is being recorded, but not the breakout sessions. If you don't want to be recorded, please can you turn your cameras off for the main session and put any notes in the chat rather than speaking. And if you're comfortable doing it, please turn on your cameras for the breakout sessions if you can. Secondly, please can you make sure you're on mute while other people are presenting to ensure clear audio for everyone. For questions for presenters, please can you use the Q&A feature at the top of your screens, and for any technical issues or general comments, please feel free to use the chat to flag up you're having problems. We'll also be having a couple of polls during the event, quick polls. They should be easy to complete, but if you run into any issues, again, just drop a message into the chat. Okay, so just wanted to start by running through today's agenda, and then we get into it. So we're going to start with a short introduction from our project funders, who are ADR England, Youth Futures Foundation, and TASER. I'll then provide an overview for our approach to mapping the data and research landscape, and for identifying the key emerging research gaps. I'll then hand over to Peter Owen, who is a co-investigator for this project, who will unpack the emerging findings that we've identified in the project in more detail. After the breakout sessions, we'll hear from Eden, who's one of a youth ambassador for Youth Employment UK, who will be speaking to us briefly about their experiences and challenges of transitioning from education to employment. This will be followed by more details of upcoming events and activities and resources that will be available to you. This includes a demo from Natasha Plazia of an excellent new online tool that navigates the administrative data landscape. And Natasha will also provide more details about our plans and training around training, development, and fellowships. Finally, we'll be hearing from Professors Lucy Griffiths and Karen Broadhurst, who provide an overview of the other ADR England Research Community Catalyst, which is focusing on children at risk of poor outcomes. So we've got quite a full action-packed agenda for today. So given that, let's make a start. Thanks again to all of you for joining us. I'll start by handing over to Karen Powell from ADR England.
Thanks so much, Jude, and morning, everyone. I'm Karen from ADR UK, that's Administrative Data Research UK, and we're one of the 3 funders for this initiative. So I'm briefly going to talk about ADR UK and our motivation for developing the community catalysts before handing over to our co-funders for this initiative, who we're absolutely delighted to be working with on this. ADR UK is funded by the Economic and Social Research Council. We're a government and academic partnership across 4 UK nations, and we're all about unlocking research insights and public good through linking administrative data. So that's data that's generated through everyday interactions with our public services like courts, health, education, and the data that we're making available for research that's in secure research environments is slowly but surely joining up different parts of people's lives, which is enabling lots of new research opportunities. And there's more data available now than ever. Next slide, please. So the community catalysts are part of the ADR England portfolio, which is made up of 4 planks: data, capacity building, research and trust. And everything we do is underpinned by the trust that we build up with data owners and the public. We've got 11 flagship data sets now, which are all available for research with publicly available documentation, 5 more data sets on the way. We're building capability for researchers to use these complex data with training and resources, expert user groups and communities. I can drop some links in the chat on those. We're also funding 44 research fellowships and 20 PhD students to use our flagship data. Our real focus at the moment is to continue to drive up the research use of our flagship data so we can access more insights and evidence to help improve outcomes for individuals and for our public services. Much of the progress that we've made to date so far has been focused on the use of our specific data sets. To really capitalise, though, on the value of linking up data across people's lives, we really wanted an investment that brought a cross-cutting perspective that looked across our data sets around an important theme where we've already got good data availability and still very much mirroring our own objectives to drive up the research use of these data. And it's our intention that the community catalysts will fulfil this cross-cutting role. So we have invested in 2 community catalysts. One for youth transitions, which we're launching today, is co-funded by Youth Futures Foundation and TASO, and another for children at risk of poor outcomes, which is co-funded by Foundations, the What Works Centre for Children and Families, which we'll briefly hear about as well towards the end of the event. And we really hope the research agendas that they've co-created with a diverse range of stakeholders and are sharing today will be a springboard for a new wave of research that tackles some of the most important questions within the sector, and that the communities brought together through this work will ensure that that research is well grounded in what can make a difference. So thank you everyone for being here today and for your interest. Please do help us shape the research agenda with your input. Yeah, thank you. And I'm going to hand over now to Jane at Youth Futures Foundation.
Hi everyone, nice to meet you. I'm Jane Mackey. I'm an Evidence and Evaluation Manager at Youth Futures Foundation. Youth Futures Foundation is really happy to be one of the co-funders for this Youth Transitions Community Catalyst. To give a bit of an introduction on who we are the National What Works Centre for Youth Employment. We have the overarching aim to understand what works to support young people into good work, and we have a particular focus on marginalised young people. Next slide, please. So as a What Works Centre, we want to do 2 key things. So the first of these is to find and generate high quality evidence, and we also want to use this evidence to inform policy and practice. And we see this work as really feeding into those 2 core objectives. Next slide, please. So we're really happy to be co-funding this project. Everything that we do as a What Works Centre is guided by robust evidence. And we see administrative data as being foundational to being able to generate this robust evidence. Administrative data has huge potential due to its scope, its completeness, the ability to track the transitions of young people longer term. And it also allows us from a Youth Futures perspective to measure the outcomes of the smaller cohorts of marginalised young people that we're interested in too. So through funding this project, we want to help to build a research landscape where researchers are equipped to conduct research on youth transitions using administrative data. And we hope that ultimately that we can all work together to build a body of high quality evidence in this area. Thanks very much. I'll hand over to Christoph.
Thank you, Jane. I'm very pleased about the opportunity to briefly outline the context and motivations for TASO to co-fund this project. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining. My name is Christoph Korbitz. I'm the Chief Research Officer here at TASO, which was set up in 2019, and we operate as an independent charity funded by the Office for Students, the regulator for higher education in England, and we're an affiliate What Centre. We're coming at this from a slightly different perspective. So our mission is to reduce inequalities in higher education. We do that by providing high quality evidence about what is effective practice in widening participation and student outcomes. Next slide, please. Our focus in thinking about populations is the group of young people as a whole who access and journey through higher education, but we also look after and invest our attention and research activity to look at specific subgroups within that wider population, and that includes care experienced young people, disabled students, mature learners as they access and journey through higher education. And in terms of the pathways and trajectories that we are interested from a TASO perspective, this is, of course, the mainstream route into higher education that most young people undertake, but we also want to understand more about less traditional routes into higher education via foundation year programs, HE access courses, work-based learning, or when people enter higher education as mature learners. So we look at all stages during the access, success, and progression phases. Yeah, if we go back to that slide, that's great. In the access and participation space, we know, for example, that there are significant and persistent inequalities. For example, only a third of young people who received free school meals go on to study at university, compared to about half of non-FSM students. We've heard from the Education Secretary just earlier in November, who called on all universities to do more to address these inequalities and these gaps. And we know that higher education providers are already doing a lot in the widening access space. They have been doing for a number of years, but which interventions really have the greatest impact? Which ones work and merit further investment and wider rollout? This is where TASO comes in our role as a What Works Centre to provide evidence and research, but also evaluation capacity building to support universities to understand which interventions work best to address these inequalities. We also know, staying on this slide, that the student experience is unequal, where there are persistent inequalities and gaps at this stage while young people are at universities. So the continuation and dropout rates are different for different socioeconomic groups. If we look at ethnicity, this year we published research on the ethnicity degree awarding gap, for example, that showed 80% of white students get a first or 2.1 compared to 63% of Black students. And this is a gap that persists even when we control and take into account students' prior attainment at school. On to the next and last slide. So I've mentioned our evaluation capacity building portfolio. We also do research ourselves and commission research to partners that often uses secondary data sources. So we are well aware of the benefits and the incredible insight that can come from administrative data sets. So this year we've commissioned flagship studies that include 3 randomized control trials and 3 evaluations that use quasi-experimental designs, and also 2 theory-based evaluation projects. We also continue working on earlier projects, including a summer schools RCT that uses UCAS data, multi-intervention outreach project that uses data from HISA and HEAT, bursary RCT, and various other projects that make use of secondary data sets, including the NPD and LEO. And one project I want to particularly highlight that is coming to an end Soon Now is a project that looks at the pathways of care experienced young people and their routes into higher education that we've commissioned the Rees Centre at Oxford University to conduct. This uses a range of administrative data sets and linked data sets, including children in need, children look after, the National Pupil Database, the individual learner record, and HESA. And this is something we've already been doing for a while at HESO from a What Works Centre perspective, and you can already glean the reasons and motivations why we're so excited about co-funding this project here, the Youth Transitions Catalyst, because we want to know more about what a successful transition looks like for young people, particularly as they journey in and through higher education. Where and why do some young people drop out of their higher education journeys, and how is that different for subgroups? What can we learn from this to improve access, success, and progression for all young people? And also, finally, what are the potential uses for using admin data and linked admin data for taking a more longer-term perspective on our causal impact evaluations? So yeah, I'm really pleased and very positive about what NFAR and its consortium partners have already achieved with this Youth Transition Catalyst project. And I look forward to hearing more today and continue working with all partners going forward. So thank you. I'm handing over to Jude from NFAR.
Thank you very much, Christoph, and to Jane and Karen. So in the next half an hour or so, we're going to talk a little bit about the data and research landscape and what we've done in this area. I'm going to start by describing the project and focusing on the first objective that we've been working on for the first part of this project. Then I'm going to hand over to Professor Peter Irwin, who's one of our co-investigators from the University of Westminster. So I'll talk for a little bit and hand over to Peter. So the aim of this project is to develop a cross-sector strategy on youth transitions that maps out current research landscape, identifies gaps in the research and data, and enables researchers to address these gaps using quantitative data sets. The scope of our work on transitions is between and within education and the labour market amongst 14 to 24-year-olds who are disadvantaged, underrepresented, and at risk of marginalisation. As I say, we're delivering this work through a consortium which is led by at the National Foundation for Educational Research. I'm the principal investigator. I'm supported by the project director, who is Neha Agarwal, who will be speaking later, and a wider team. We also have within our partnership Professor Peter Irwin, as I mentioned, from University of Westminster, Dr. Jake Anders and Dr. Claire Crawford from UCL, Dave Thompson from FFT Data Lab, and Professor Alex Sutherland from Oxford. The work started at the end of January this year and will complete on the 31st of March 2026. So I wanted to just start by sort of talking a little bit briefly about what we mean by youth transitions. So youth transitions are journeys of young people in and out of education and employment. They're sort of transitions, everyone goes through a transition, but our focus is particularly on disadvantaged young people. So journeys, we're focusing on journeys which are characterized by experiences and outcomes, but only the latter really can be measured using administrative data, which means that we have to kind of focus on that be aware of that when we're thinking about how we use the data to answer questions. Disadvantage, of course, is very complex and multidimensional. It's context dependent, and it affects the experiences and outcomes that young people have, and is also affected by the experiences and outcomes. And of course, disadvantage and marginalization does not necessarily have an endpoint. It can affect individuals into later life. Therefore, we're taking an approach which is agile, pragmatic, and collaborative. Right. So we have 4 broad objectives to this project. The first of which is providing strategic research leadership. And what we're doing here is we're going to build on what's already known. We're mapping out the existing research that's been collected over the last 5 years. We're going to try to determine the evidence on the gaps in the evidence on youth transitions. We're having done an initial sift. I'll say more about this later. We consult with key stakeholders on the gaps, and from that identify the research priorities and develop a research agenda. The second objective is about building capacity for administrative data using admin data. Now, administrative data in the area of youth transitions is underused, we believe, and we aim to build capacity of data users within the sector through a variety of activities and events. To help raise awareness of the available data, etc., provide training resources, signposted tools and information, and developing and maintaining a sustainable hub. So we will have a series of training events. We'll tell you more about them later. A series of case studies, conferences and resources which will be shared. And we'll also be coordinating and facilitating the development of a training and research resource hub, which more details later too. Our third objective is about developing a diverse administrative data research community. And our objectives in this particular area are to build an active, collaborative and sustainable youth transitions research community, first and foremost, to ensure key stakeholders that are aware and engaged with the project and the research agenda. And what we're trying to do is to position the research agenda as a priority for attention and action, particularly amongst data owners and funding organizations, so that timely investment into the development of administrative data and research using these data can take place. We also want to raise awareness of youth transitions and administrative data amongst prospective researchers and encourage them to explore research ideas in this area. Finally, our fourth objective is about addressing research priorities through embedded fellowship. So not only do we want to highlight the research priority, the research gaps and prioritize which ones need to be addressed, we actually want to kick off some work ourselves through this project to address these gaps. So this means creating research opportunities for others through fellowships, which will provide real life experience of applying for and using ADR flagship datasets. We also want to encourage engagement with the research community, obviously, and finally to leverage additional funds to address research priorities in the area of youth transition through this work. So those are the 4 main objectives for the project. I wanted to go back to the first one, which is about providing strategic research leadership, and tell you a little bit about what we've been doing in the first sort of 9 months of this project, because this is the area we've focused mostly on to date. So so this is about identifying the current research base. To do that, what we did was we mapped out the recent evidence base in this area, okay, using a range of search criteria, which was based on date range, geographic location, transitions and outcomes in scope, populations of interest, research methods, etc. Our search strategy combined a combination of approaches. We screened relevant publications, relevant websites, We searched by dataset names and keyword searching. So we identified who had applied for what datasets and for what purposes. We also reviewed eminent researchers in this area and looked at their biography lists and identified suitable research from that. So we used a number of different methods. And we identified a large number of relevant studies, which we then went through and coded across 3 dimensions. So the transition stage that we're at, you know, key stage 3 to key stage 4, for example, key stage 4 to key stage 5. The characteristics of the young people, and the type of research, which was either categorized. We developed this typology, which was either descriptive, causal, evaluative, or methodological. And what we did was, having worked through all of the research reports that we found, we summarized the findings using an evidence gap map, which is shown on the next page. So just to explain how this works, across the top is the transitions that people take. So to say key stage 3 to key stage 4, key stage 4 to further education, further education to higher education, key stage, etc. And then down the left-hand side there are, you know, the population groups of interest, which our funders are particularly interested in. So young people with history of youth offending, young people with, from an ethnic minority group, young people with physical or mental health, etc. Okay, and then as you can see on the right-hand side, we have our key, which is the types of research. So type 1 was descriptive research, basically. Type 2 is evaluating the impact of pathways on later outcomes. Type 3 is analysis of policy impact during transition, trying to identify causal impacts. Sorry, my dog's barking in the background. Hopefully you can't hear her. And what we've done in this chart is we've kind of mapped information about the numbers of research that we found in each of those areas. So, for example, young people from an ethnic minority background who are transitioning from key stage 4 to further education, we found 14 descriptive research pieces, 6 which evaluated the impact of pathways on later outcomes, and 2 bits which, you know, analyze the policy impact during transitions. And what we did was we used this map to it helped us sort of identify the transition and groups of young people with limited evidence. Okay, and from this we produced a list of topics which appeared to be lacking in coverage in recent literature. Now, it's worth sort of saying we've only looked at literature from the last 5 years. It's a recent literature research. There may well be more literature which, you know, has historically been done. We didn't have the time or budget to go back and do everything much further back. So the next step, what we did was we I'll come back to this slide in a second. We went out and we spoke to a diverse group of stakeholders representing government, the third sector, funders. Can you go on to the next slide, please? And academia. And we had we interviewed them, and the objectives for these discussions were to evaluate the alignment between our gaps, the things that we had identified from our data gap, with their knowledge and experience of the gaps in the evidence, and with them to get their perspective on what the priority gaps for filling were. We also use these sessions to explore the role of administrative data in addressing these gaps. You know, to what extent could they be addressed using administrative data, and we discussed with them what they saw as the training and resource requirements. Just going back to the previous slide, in parallel with the activities that we're doing in terms of mapping out the research evidence, we also mapped out the data landscape to understand the scope and coverage of administrative data sets which are available to answer some of these questions. This included all large data sets with existing and potential application in this area. But we limited the scope to secondary quantitative data. So administrative data sets, large surveys, and longitudinal studies. And Natasha, my colleague, will be sort of saying more about this later. Okay. Finally, yes. So from the review of the searching and sifting through all the reports and the stakeholder engagement activities, we were able to develop an emerging research agenda, which was informed by our assessment of gaps in recent literature and the discussion with these experts. We hope to further refine this list today. So we're presenting the draft list, and we welcome your feedback on what what we're sharing with you, and we will be refining it as we go forward. Okay. And it's our intention to publish this revised list of research priorities on the resource hub that we're developing by the end of this year. And this will be then used as the basis for our activities in the next phase of the project. So I now want to hand over to my colleague, Professor Peter Irwin from the University of Westminster, who's going to say a little bit more about the emerging research gaps that we've identified. Over to you, Peter.
Thanks very much, Jude. So if we can, that's me on there. These are emerging gaps. So one of the activities today is for you to feed into these emerging gaps and kind of give your views on them. Ultimately, as Jude's kind of gone through, we have carried out a lot of activities, looking at the research, engaging with stakeholders. And what I'm going to do is give you an idea of how we bring this together to determine our focus or our emerging focus in terms of the research and the priorities that we're going to push in this area, but also how we've joined that up with the discussions we've had with stakeholders, which kind of tease out the barriers that they face to engaging with the admin data and analysing or looking into the experiences of the particular groups of young people we're looking at, and also the pathways that they take. So ultimately, I'm going to give you an idea of the research themes, which will be part of our focus for taking forward engagement activities with the research community. They're going to unpack these themes, think of specific questions, and also our engagement with research and policy agenda of the new government, thinking about where our kind of activities feature in those research agendas and how we can support the development of evidence to inform policy making, especially with obviously a particular focus on admin data analysis. So the bit I'm going to tease out is the research agenda. I'm then going to give you a brief idea of how this gives us, or how this drives our focus in terms of the training and resource provision to overcome those barriers that stakeholders feel are there that kind of limit their ability to analyze the data and look into the groups that we're interested in. And also I'll give you an idea of our approach to the fellowships. My colleague Natasha from Data Lab is going to pick up on specifics of the training, so I'm just going to give you a bit of an resource. I'm just going to give you an overview, and also Natasha will give you an idea of the admin data map that Jude mentioned. So this research agenda really gives us an idea of how we fit in the jigsaw of training providers. So we're thematic in terms of looking at youth transitions. There are lots of providers who are focused on particular admin data sets. This gives us an idea of how we focus in that jigsaw of provision. So next slide, we can have a look at. So one of the kind of starting points in terms of taking the outcomes from the activities that Jude's mentioned is that we've got an idea of those particular groups of young people for whom there is a real gap in the evidence and our understanding of their experiences as they make transitions through education and employment and take particular pathways. I'll talk about those pathways broadly in a second. So young offenders, those young people experiencing social care, specific ethnic groups, and young people experiencing physical or mental health difficulties. So these are particular groups of young people where we've looked at the evidence, the existing evidence, and spoken to stakeholders, and there are big gaps just in basic understanding of the experiences of these young people and the pathways they take. And a lot of that's to do with the kind of disrupted pathways and the disruptive experiences that they do take because of their, well, very closely linked to their kind of the disadvantage that they face. So big gap is transitions made by these specific, our understanding of the transitions and pathways made by these specific groups of disadvantaged young people. So our starting point for these groups is very much to say, well, the first step is really to describe or map the pathways, to look at the admin data sets and think about how we can support this, to look at young offenders or those experiencing social care and say, right, all pathways are in scope, and we just need to understand, did they go through, what's their experience of going through education, then into further education post 16, education, and then into higher education or through employment or NEET. Okay, so really taking the individual young person's perspective and then trying to map their experiences through these various pathways. So I'll come back to our focus on the post-16 outcomes. That's very much driven by our engagement with stakeholders and the challenges they face in terms of data sets. But there is a significant lack of quantitative evidence in this area. One of the kind of another theme two is really when we look at the pathways that those young people are taking, we want to have a particular focus on their experience of, for instance, school exclusion, lower attainment, especially at key stage 4. For instance, the kind of their experience of having special educational needs and disabilities, and really to try and tease out commonalities of experience across groups or not. Yeah, to see how that kind of relates to potential policy interventions, and really to start to tease out pathways associated with more successful transitions. This gives you an idea of not our priorities so much, but the thing that we've taken from the evidence is that really we don't have a great understanding of the basic experiences of these groups of young people. And really our kind of theme 1 and theme 2 is really to understand the basics of the experiences and the pathways they take through education and employment, to then arrive at the kind of question of what works. So to look at causal impacts into particular interventions. Our basic kind of premise is to understand better what the experiences of these young people are, and then to think, okay, we now understand the experiences. Have we got a better idea of the particular transitions? Is it post-16 that we want to have a look at in terms of thinking what works to improve outcomes? Okay, so that's very much an individual perspective from these groups of young people that we've identified. I've not mentioned young people from socially disadvantaged backgrounds because we found that there is a lot more evidence on their experiences and mapping of their pathways, including through the admin data, but less on the causal impacts. So they do feature in what we're talking about here, but I'll come back to that. So if we can go to the next slide. So the first slide talks about, and as I say, I'll come back to how this feeds into our focus in terms of training and resource provision. But the first focus is very much on looking at individual groups and then saying, from an admin data perspective or education employment outcomes perspective, any and all pathways are in scope. Okay. The second one is to kind of, our second focus is really to think about or to look at particular pathways which are associated with these groups of disadvantaged young people. So for instance, we particularly see young people in post 16, post 18 who are NEET. So we want to have a particular focus on mapping pathways into and out of that state of not in education, employment or training. Ultimately, this really relates to the admin data because I mean, it's not ironic, but slightly ironic, is if you're looking at young people who have particularly fractured pathways through education and employment, they often tend to be those that are not picked up by admin data sets. So if they are at home, they're not on any benefits, they're not in employment, they're not in any form of education or training, then ultimately they disappear a little bit. So these admin data sets give us a great opportunity to look into the experiences of groups of young people who perhaps wouldn't be picked up by surveys in large numbers, but also they do present their own challenges in terms of having this idea of missingness is very closely linked to what are they doing because they've disappeared from the admin data sets. So this is a real focus of our approach. And also it's a real challenge for people who are new to the admin data because this is a real kind of, to use the technical term, it's quite messy in terms of trying to unpick these various sources of data that you can use to try and identify young people and their experiences. Second theme is really about later life learning or mature learning. This is for those who are interested. This is very much, for instance, the adult skills budget. So mapping the pathways into and out of, we called it second chance mature learning to differentiate it really from lifelong learning, which is associated with less disrupted progression through a lifetime as you kind of upskill. This is more about, for instance, young people who have got to, young people who are, they're younger than me, 30s, 40s, who have had disrupted employment profiles and perhaps have a period of unemployment and go back to learning at level 2 and level 3, which is an outcome or the average level of achievement that we expect at kind of age 16. So really second chance mature learning, looking at the extent to which the young people that we are focused on in later life do their pathways into and out of this second chance mature learning. And thinking it's an intervention, a pathway. So we'd really be happy to get feedback on this when we get to the breakout groups. And it does go beyond the target, our focus, which Jude mentioned, which is a particular age group. But I think we can kind of, you know, we're talking about some learning which is taking place when people are in their 30s or 40s. So it does go a little bit beyond our target. But it's a potential strength of the admin data set, but it does present its own challenges. Theme 3 really does present a lot of challenges in terms of actually work-based learning. We can pick up in the admin data work-based learning that is government funded. So the classic one is apprenticeships, and we can pick up some classroom related work-based learning. But ultimately, there's a real challenge here. This is something that we want to look at perhaps as an area, a particular area where we're going to engage with providers of data and look at the existing admin data provision and linkages and think how we might be able to push things forward over a number of years. So first, gaps and themes 1 is very much looking at individual groups of young people. Any and all pathways are in scope. The second one is really looking at particular pathways or transitions where we see a predominance of disadvantaged young people and thinking about how we help researchers to investigate those pathways, which tend to be particularly challenging in terms of the admin data. So just to give you a bit of an idea of that. So if we go to the next slide. So if you think of the that first pathway where we have lots of people, colleagues at UCL, colleagues in ADR, kind of providing support across all these pathways. We'll come back to longitudinal educational outcomes data, individualized learner record data, and so on and so forth. You've got all these data sets, and we are going to provide how-to guides on, for instance, how do you capture, or what's the kind of main ways that you capture and identify and what approaches can you use to analyse the transitions of young people from socially disadvantaged backgrounds? So thinking of how you capture that in terms of free school meal status, IMD status, and other indicators, so that we kind of help people to use similar approaches, or at least know when they're using different approaches, to identify those who are, in this case, socially disadvantaged. So research can compare and contrast across studies, and we can help to build a better understanding of the experiences of these young people. Similarly with, how do you identify young people who are care experienced? What are the strengths and limitations of the admin data? So really, from that first overall theme, we're looking at providing how-to guides for the particular groups of young people that we're looking at. How do you identify them across all these pathways, and what are the strengths and weaknesses, or kind of opportunities and limitations of the admin data? The second bit is really looking at particular pathways, and this is where again, Natasha's going to detail some of this. But for instance, one of the kind of things that stakeholders have said to us, quite a few stakeholders when we've been talking to them, is I don't really look at data post 16, or I don't look at experiences of young people post 16, because it becomes much more challenging. For those who know a bit about the data, what you've got is one data set, the MPD, which you can look at up to kind of age 16. And then when you start to consider the transitions of young people post 16 and their pathways, you have to draw on a number of data sets. And for instance, one of the data sets, the individualized learner record, is more challenging to analyze. So what we're going to do is we're going to provide support on those pathways that we see a lot of young people taking who are in our kind of groups of interest, and try and provide support for researchers who are looking at data sets which tend to be more challenging because of the nature of the pathways. Young people who go through further education are much more likely to have multiple learning aims and various other kind of, and make transitions and kind of chop and change between things. So it becomes more challenging to identify those kind of experiences and standardize them across studies. So how-to guides focused on individual groups, and then looking at particular pathways. Jude has mentioned the fellows, so we are going to be advertising for fellowships soon, and they will be starting in March, April 2025. Essentially, we are going to start them on to kind of get over the catch-22 that we, again, with stakeholders, we've kind of come across, which is the idea that in order to make a well-informed submission to analyze and access the admin data, you've had to use and had experience of the admin data. So we will put in place projects, for instance, that are looking at NEET and looking at the ILR data, which these young people can join, and the fellows will then make their own submissions for funding. So the idea is to have something in place subject to project addendums that they can join, and then subsequently, as they're getting experience with ourselves, with colleagues at Data Lab and UCL, as they're getting experience of working with the admin data, they can make informed submissions for their own projects. And I think I'm just about spot on time there, Jude. So I'll hand over to you.
You are, Peter. Thanks very much for keeping to time. And thanks very much for that summary. Up next, we're going to be moving into smaller breakout groups where we'd like you to discuss a few key questions that we should hopefully see on your screen now. Each group will have a facilitator who will be taking non-attributed notes, so that you have to worry about being attributed. So feel free to share openly. After this session, we will review your insights alongside what we've already collected, and we'll review our research, emerging research gaps, etc., and we'll publish this later in the year. So you're automatically going to be assigned to a breakout group now, and we'll reconvene in about 15 to 20 minutes. So I'll see you shortly. I got all of
There we go.
Oh.
Hello, everyone.
Hello. Are we all back? Or are we all coming back?
I think we're coming back.
I think we're coming back.
Okay. Naya, are you keeping an eye on the chat and answering questions?
I don't think I've replied to any questions yet.
Well, I've answered a couple, so if there's anyone that you want to pick up, feel free to. Or we'll do it afterward. Okay. Right, is everyone back? Welcome back, everyone. Are we still expecting some more back, Emma?
I don't think so. I think that's everyone.
Okay, well, welcome back, everyone. Thanks very much for your valuable input into the breakout sessions. So we're going to do a quick Microsoft poll now, which should be appearing on your screen soon. If you could just take a minute or two to answer the questions, we'd really appreciate it. They're not very tricky, but here we go. Take a Okay. Good. Right. Okay. While you're doing that, I'd like to introduce Sarah Latimer from the Youth Employment UK. Sarah will be sharing some insights into the challenges that young people face when transitioning from education to employment. And then afterwards, we'll be hearing directly from one of YEF's, Youth Employment UK's youth ambassadors, who will share their personal experience in a short recording. So over to you, Sarah.
Hi there, everyone, and thank you for having me. Yes, so I'm Sarah Latimer. I'm the Senior Education and Careers Lead at Youth Employment UK. Just to give a little bit of background context about who Youth Employment UK are, we are a community interest company set up in 2012 with the aim of tackling youth unemployment. And over the years, we have become the expert voice on youth employment. We're ideally placed to understand the complex landscape that young people are facing at the moment. And we also know that to achieve full youth employment, support the economy and ensure that all young people are able to fulfil their potential, we must improve transitions from education to employment, support employers to attract, retain and develop young people, and ensure that no young person is left behind. Every year as an organisation, we conduct our annual Youth Voice Census. This is a survey that is open to 11 to 30-year-olds across the UK, and it builds a really strong picture of young people's views and experiences of what it's like where they live, study, work or train, what works well, but of course what could be better. And our 2024 Youth Voice Census had over 5,000 respondents and highlighted that nearly 2/3 of 17 to 19-year-olds feel that they are not at all confident or not so confident that they will find a good job locally. It also cast a light on the barriers and challenges that many young people face in accessing work, with a lack of local jobs, lack of work experience, and anxiety are top 3 barriers. With the latest ONS data signifying that 872,000 young people are long-term unemployed, it's crucial that we continue to research in this area to address these challenges. So I would now like to introduce one of Youth Employment UK's youth ambassadors, Eden. She has recorded a video sharing her story transitioning from education, starting at sixth form, to higher education and into employment. And she shares some of the challenges that she has faced on her journey. If we would like to share her video now. Thank you for listening.
Hey, sorry I wasn't able to make it today, but I'm going to be talking a bit about my experiences from transitioning from sixth form to uni and then to the workplace. So I'm Eden, I'm 21 and I'm from Belfast, Northern Ireland. So the transition from sixth form to leaving school and becoming an adult hasn't been an easy one for me for a number of different reasons, which I will explain in this session. I completed my English, Geography and Health and Social Care A-levels, and I had a passion for working with children and young people, either as a teacher or as a social worker. The support I received in school around career progression and transitioning wasn't the most helpful. There was a lot of focus on university, but there wasn't any opportunity to explore options that weren't going to university. At the time, I felt like this was the only option for me. During my time in school, we didn't get any opportunities to do work experience, and I definitely think having this opportunity would have helped me with making a decision about what I wanted to do when leaving school. The COVID pandemic meant that opportunities for work experience weren't available, so me and other young people my age really felt that impact. I unfortunately became quite well with long COVID 2 months before my A-level exams, and I didn't massively receive a lot of support from my school during this time. As you can imagine, this was a really challenging time for me, having to prioritise my health over studying. I was lucky enough to get the grades that I needed to be able to start my social work degree in September, but unfortunately I wasn't well enough and wasn't able to start this degree. Because of this, I had to change my plans and focused on my health and recovery during this year instead. I also decided to do a health and social care course part-time to continue my studies and work part-time as a teaching assistant in a local college supporting adults with additional needs. I really enjoyed both of these experiences as they allowed me to still feel like I was contributing to society and working towards my goals whilst also being really unwell. I didn't receive a lot of support from my employer or the course, but I was able to choose my hours, which provided me with flexibility and allowed me to balance my recovery with moving forward and progressing in my career. In September 2023, I made the decision to start university to do my social work degree. Unfortunately, due to my health condition, alongside a lack of support and understanding from the university, I had to drop out after 2 weeks. There was no additional support put in place for me, and the course was quite strict on in-person attendance, and there was no flexibility around this. The toll my health condition could have on my ability to keep up with the high demands of the course was really difficult, and there was no flexibility offered around this for me. Juggling all of this and a lack of adjustments being put in place was really challenging. It would have made such a difference to me if the university had more awareness and understanding of the challenges that young people with disabilities or health conditions face, and if we could have discussed adjustments such as hybrid working for lectures. Despite these challenges, I've been passionate about progressing in my career, building experience and continuing my studies. I'm currently working part-time as a youth advisor for Ambitious About Autism, as well as doing online courses related to ICT and marketing. I continue to manage the symptoms that long COVID presents me with, but I'm also hoping to go back to my social work degree next September. What has really helped me during the last 2.5 years has been volunteering and taking part in social action projects. I have worked with over 60 different organisations and charities, some of which include Youth Employment UK, Action for Children and Sense. Youth social action has allowed me to develop my confidence and skills in communication, leadership, teamwork, organisation and resilience, of which are important transferable skills that are useful for future employment. It has also allowed me to try out new opportunities such as speaking at conferences, creating content and speaking to key decision makers such as politicians and the Education Authority on important issues that young people face. It has also given me a sense of purpose and a new sense of identity, during which has been quite a challenging 2 years for me. The support that I've got from the staff from these organisations, as well as the other young people, has been really helpful and motivated me to keep going. They're very understanding and adaptable to my needs and provide me with lots of encouragement. The support from Ambitious About Autism with my role as a youth advisor has been really great. They provided me with a thorough induction process, which allowed me to adjust to the role and meet the other young people I'd be working with. The role is also very accommodating to my needs with the flexibility of hours, so I can choose what shifts to do. It's also all online, which suits my energy needs, as I sometimes find it hard to travel, so remote working works better for me. The staff are also really supportive and approachable and are always very responsive to questions and accommodating to individual needs. They help me feel really prepared for any opportunities, as there is always a very detailed briefing before any event, which helps me to feel confident going into it. Overall, I have found that the transition from school to higher education and to the workplace isn't always an easy one, but with the right support from staff, in-depth training and the use of mentoring schemes, this allows for an easier transition. This will ensure young people are getting the best out of their experiences on the transition period. Thank you all so much for listening, and if you have any questions, then feel free to ask them. Take care, everybody.
Thank you very much to Sarah and to Eden there. That was really, we thought it was really important to just really bring to life the sorts of challenges that young people face in making this difficult transition from education to employment. I think Eden really sort of gave you a sense of some of the things that she's had to contend with. So really huge thanks to both Sarah and to Eden for bringing that to life for us. Right, we should move on. So next I'm going to hand over to our project director, Neha Agarwal from NFER, and to Natasha Plazer from FFT Data Lab. They'll be sharing our plans for community engagement, for training, development and fellowship opportunities. Natasha will also provide a demo of our brilliant online tool, data tool, which will be available to all of you to use and benefit from. So over to you, Neha, in the first instance, I think.
Thanks, Jude. Hi, everyone. As Jude said, I'm Neha Agarwal. I'm the project director for this Youth Transitions project and a data strategy lead and research director at NFER. First of all, I must say it's lovely to see so many of you join this event, see some familiar faces and names as well. So thank you very much. I hope you're enjoying what you've and finding it interesting what you've heard so far. In terms of one of the core objectives that Jude set out at the start of this session for this project is around this idea of developing a community for youth transitions. And we very much believe that the work that we have embarked on will require input from a very diverse group of people. Diversity, not just in terms of how they recognize themselves, their experiences, but also in terms of the knowledge and the experience that they bring to the table. At the very start of the project, I set out a communication and stakeholder engagement strategy, which is a work in progress. The community is constantly growing, and I'm sure we'll be adding more to it. But we identified these 4 key principles for our community engagement program. First and foremost, obviously, to raise awareness. Awareness not just about youth transitions and some of those emerging research priorities that Pete was referring to, but also about admin data, administrative data, and what administrative data can bring to this investigation. And just get a dialogue going, get some encourage some engagement between various specialists like yourselves to start talking about those questions, those tricky questions, unanswered questions on youth transitions, and how we could start addressing them using administrative data. Goes without saying, knowledge sharing, I think, is really important. It really struck me as one of the key aspects of our stakeholder engagement program when we were consulting various specialists, as Jude mentioned. A lot of the people mentioned there's almost a lack of almost information or awareness around what else is out there. So who else is working in this area? What other research has already been done? We get a few glimpses of information from various different sources, but I suppose to an extent it's probably an after effect of the pandemic, that we are not seeing enough people, and therefore that natural knowledge sharing that used to happen, whether it is within the office environment or through conferences, etc., is not happening. So we almost want to create platforms that allow people to share knowledge with each other. Again, linked to that is around those opportunities for learning and development. And as you might have already picked up, certainly in our group, in our breakout session, we were talking about those areas of information or data assets that we are aware of, but we probably know little about, or we don't know how to actually bring them together to be able to answer those questions. So what can we learn from each other in terms of being able to answer some of those questions, which links to that final point around exploring solutions and collaborations. And already I'm seeing in the chat where we have got those kernels of ideas that could be explored further, and might, who knows, might turn into some sort of solutions or collaborations or partnerships. So we very much want to create a sense of community that allows all those initiatives, and to be able to allow you to plug into that community and remain in the know. We have provided that QR code, so I will encourage you to scan that QR code, and we'll put a link to a form in the chat as well. Hopefully you'll be able to access that, but if not, then don't worry, we'll send it to you in an email afterwards. But that will just allow you to register your name and email address if you'd like to join the community and find out more about events and resources, etc., which is what myself and Natasha will be talking to you about in the next 20 minutes or so. Next slide, please. So in terms of how you can get involved, we have carved out a program of community engagement, which will take us from this point onwards all the way up to the end of this project in March 2026, and hopefully beyond, because we very much want this to be a conversation starter. And we want to lay the foundations for this, on which hopefully we can build a self-sustaining community for youth transitions researchers, practitioners, and policymakers. So first and foremost, we will be holding the project group will be holding 2 research conferences, youth transition research conferences, one next year and one the year after. All details will be shared with those who are interested in being a part of this community. But essentially, it will focus not just on researchers and data users, but also on policymakers and practitioners, because we very much want to see more research that is informing and advising policymakers, but also that can feed directly into practitioners' activities. So that whole idea of applied research is very close to everyone's heart, I think. We do want to promote the use of administrative data in order to address some of those research priorities that Pete has already highlighted, but which will be refined more after we've taken stock of everything that we've heard from you today. As I've said at the start, we do want to create these opportunities for learning and development. Now, whether those are through active training courses, which is what Natasha will talk about in a second, or even through workshops. And like I said, that meeting and mingling with people in those forums is a really good platform for learning and development. In addition to research conferences, we will be providing a separate online platform for those people who want to remain connected with people. And often, I'm sure it is the same for many of you, that you come away from these research conferences, you've had some really insightful, thought-provoking conversations, and then actually you disappear until you perhaps re-engage with those people at the next conference. So what do we do in the middle? So hopefully this online platform will allow you to maintain those connections. We will certainly use it actively to make important announcements, so you're aware of any events and resources that are being published, but also hopefully it will provide you that, certainly for those individuals who are probably working with administrative data sets, they want to ask questions in a semi-formal setting with other colleagues who might be working on a similar sort of a research project using similar data sets. And some of you may already be familiar with the online communities similar to this, like the one for longitudinal educational outcomes. So we plan to create that for the purpose of youth transitions. We will also be issuing newsletters starting next year. So again, this is our way of shining a light on some of the excellent work that is already happening within the research community. And I'll use that cliched phrase, for the community, by the community, and I actually mean it. So while we will provide the bare bones, we will facilitate the production and the circulation of the newsletters, the content will very much be driven by yourselves and other members of the community. It will hopefully also provide you with an informal channel for getting your research peer reviewed. And also, again, it will give you the opportunity to perhaps promote some of the upcoming events or activities that are being organised by yourselves and your organisations. And lastly, look out for our resource hub, which will be a set of web pages, like a microsite attached to ADR England's website. And this essentially, as it says on the tile here, will be a one-stop shop for all the resources relevant to youth transitions. So it will include things like the evidence gap map, a link to the data tool that Natasha will be talking about very shortly, but also a very clearly articulated list of our emerging research priorities. So you very much can see why this project exists and where we are going with our ambition and with our activities. It will be updated throughout the lifetime of this project, but hopefully beyond that as well. Again, it's that whole idea of creating a sustainable community. And once again, the QR code is present on the website, so on the slide. So please go ahead and join the community. I think at this point, I hand over to my colleague, Natasha. Natasha, over to you.
So I think we were talking a lot in our breakout group about the creating a community and how valuable we thought that was going to be. So it was great to hear more about how we're going to do that today. So I'm going to talk a bit more about some of the resources that we're planning to make and some of the perhaps more practical things that we are planning to do to try and support researchers to access admin datasets to do this sort of research. So if I could have the first slide, lovely. So slight false advertising here. In the interest of keeping us to time, I'm actually not going to talk about fellowships. Pete already covered them in the second session that we had. So hopefully that's still fresh and vivid in your mind. So I'm just going to focus on the first 2 points here. The dataset map that we've heard quite a bit about already. And also the training resources that we're planning to put together specifically for the LEO dataset. So I should say that we're obviously at an early stage of the project. This is the launch event. So these are our initial ideas of things that we could do, but we'd love to hear from you if you think these are helpful, sort of right lines. If there are other things that you'd be interested in, do feel free to obviously pop stuff in the chat now or get in touch later on. And I think as well that things will probably emerge as the community grows that might be useful. So hopefully we'll be able to facilitate them or maybe point people in the right direction as the community develops. So if we could go to the next slide, I'll talk about the dataset map. So before, I'll show you some screenshots in a minute rather than a full demo. I didn't want to risk doing a live demo in front of you all, which will probably something will go wrong. But before I do that, just to talk about why we thought this would be a useful thing to do. So we are aware really as researchers, there are a lot of data sets out there that could be used to study different aspects of youth transitions, or, you know, in lots of cases, there is more than one that could be used to study sort of one area of interest. So we wanted to first of all, just pull together essentially a list of all of them that researchers could look through to see what is available to them, particularly if you're sort of just starting out in this field, you're not really aware of what's out there. We thought that could be potentially really useful. And if we could just have the next couple of points up, there we go. We also thought that potentially some of the gaps that we identified in the research might be linked to gaps in the data. So we thought if we could map what sort of potential transitions the current data sets that are available cover, that would give us an idea of whether those gaps are linked to gaps in the data, or if they're not. So if we have a look at the next slide, I think we should have a screenshot of the sort of first page of the tool. So there's a link to the tool that appears on a lighter slide. I'll pop it in the chat when I'm finished talking as well, if you want to go and have a little play around. But what we've done here is just a very simple attempt at visualizing what the data sets that are out there sort of cover in terms of youth transitions that people might be interested in. And this is a first attempt, I guess, at doing this. So if this doesn't really make much sense to anyone, please let us know. We are open to kind of revising this a little bit. But what we've done here is we've tried to see the different phases that young people might pass through in their pathway through education and employment. So we've got compulsory schooling up to age 16, we've got post-16 schooling, further education, higher education, employment. And then we've also got areas that are not necessarily things that everyone goes in and out of, or sort of phases of people's lives, but things in which you might be interested in studying transition. So we've got social care, health, and justice on there. And what we've done is we've just shown which data sets you could use to study sort of the intersection of any of these two areas. So you can see if you look at school education up to post-16 education, so if you're interested in the transition between those two things, we found 10 data sets that you might want to use to do that. But if you're interested in the transition between school and further education, we only found 3 data sets that you could use to do that. So there's less available data out there for that research. And of course, we found that those sorts of pathways perhaps through further education or less academic routes are areas where there do seem to be some research gaps. So it may be that that's perhaps linked to a lack of data or a bit less data being available for research in that area. Also to highlight, if you look at the sort of justice column, there are not very many data sets out there that you can use to look at that, but there is at least one data set available for that area. So I think that's hopefully gives some useful insights into one reason why some of those gaps that we talked about earlier might be emerging. If I could have the next slide. So this is perhaps the more practical area, certainly for researchers. It's probably what I would find more useful. So it's a searchable list of all of the data sets that we identified. And you can search by, see here on the left of the screen, I've searched by area of interest. So there's a big drop-down list that you can choose from. I've chosen disadvantaged young people here, and it's brought up a list of all the data sets that you could use to study transitions made by that group. Alternatively, if you're interested in a specific transition from, say, school to FE, or FE into employment, or whatever, you can also search by the phases that you're interested in. So if you're interested in that specific transition between 2 phases, you can search by that as well, and see a list and some basic information about the data sets that are out there and what they cover. And then if we have the next slide. So if you do find a data set that you think looks like something you might be interested in, you can click on it and get a little bit more information on how to access it, and an external link which should give you more information and the opportunity to actually apply to access that data set. So this is a bit of a prototype at the moment. We'd love to hear from you if you think it's useful, if it's something you might use, if there's something else that might be useful to add in. So you can access it at the link that's shown here. When you're on there, if you do have any comments that you don't get the chance to make today, if you scroll down to the bottom of any pages on the tool, you should see our contact info on there. So feel free to get in touch with any ideas, suggestions, feedback. We would love to hear from you. So I think that's all on the data map. So if we have the next slide. So you may have noticed the data set that appeared, that we selected on the screenshot there, was the Leo data set, chosen to transition seamlessly into this next part, which is about training resources that we are planning to put together specifically for the use of the Leo data set. So yeah, you may be asking, why Leo? Why not any of the other 21 data sets that we identified? Well, ADR UK were already offering training, Karen mentioned earlier, for quite a few of the other data sets specifically that we identified, and sort of more broadly for use of administrative data sets for education research. So we didn't want to duplicate anything that was already out there. So we wanted to do something at this point that's really focused for youth transitions and links back to those themes and gaps that we identified that Pete talked about earlier. And a lot of those gaps were about young people who take a pathway through education other than what you might call the sort of traditional academic route. So they're not going GCSE, A-level, uni into employment. Maybe they're going returning to education as mature learners, or they're just taking a different pathway. So we think that LEO is the obvious data set to use to study these sorts of pathways. Because it's longitudinal, you can follow young people throughout their school career and into their employment career. It includes further education data as well as school data, and of course includes employment data. But we do think that it's a data set that is particularly challenging to work with, particularly for new users. And so there may be that's a barrier to people doing research in this area. So you may be thinking, you've completely lost me, I don't know what LEO is. Okay, fair enough, this is what it is. So LEO stands for Longitudinal Education Outcomes. It's a linked data set, so it includes education and labour market data. And when I say it's a linked data set, it links together quite a lot more data sets than a lot of other linked admin data sets out there. So it includes a lot of different data from a lot of different sources. And that's why it's so comprehensive and rich. But also it is partly why it makes it quite difficult to work with, as we'll see on the next slide. Yes, so the challenges of LEO, why is it that it's particularly difficult to work with? So LEO is accessed within the SRS, Secure Research Service, which is true of most, if not all, admin data sets that you'll be working with. But unlike most of those other data sets, you don't get a choice in the format in which LEO data is provided to you. It's provided in a SQL Server database. So obviously that's a barrier right there if you are not someone who works with SQL. And I know a lot of people who do quantitative research don't necessarily work with SQL. So that can mean that even to sort of get hold of the data in order to start your analysis, you don't know how to do it if you don't use SQL. It's also just a little bit of a faff to work with in lots of ways. So it's in several different data sets. When it comes to linking them together, they don't have a sort of common person identifier that you can use. You have to link each one to a lookup table and then link that to the next table. And that's particularly tricky with LEO because it is a really big data set, which means it can be very time consuming to work with. It takes a long time to run each of your queries. We'll be talking hours, maybe days to just do your cleaning up and linking together of the data to get it in the form that you want to work with. And you may be thinking, if you look at the number of rows and so on that we've put in here, that doesn't sound like that much data to you. But if you're working within the SRS, you're using their servers, and it's relatively a very big data set, and it doesn't really run particularly quickly or smoothly within the SRS. So it is a time-consuming thing, and that means that if you're not confident with your SQL, it can mean it's even more of a challenge because you might have to wait hours or days to find out that something hasn't worked. So on to what we're actually planning to do. If we could see the next slide. Here we go. So we're planning, first of all, just some introductory SQL guidance for LEO users that will just get people started, get you into SQL and just looking at the data. And then we're also planning, very practically, some example scripts that you can use for use with LEO to get you started on the sorts of things that we think most users are likely to want to do. So cleaning of the data, imputation of missing data where you need to do that, creation of pathways. So if you're interested in a particular pathway through education, you can identify whether a young person has followed that pathway or not, and calculating measures that you might be interested in. So things like the number of days that people have been enrolled in different sorts of education, how many days they've been in receipt of benefits, and so on. So that will be, for some people, perhaps all that you need to get the data in the form that you want to analyze. For other people, at least, it's a really good start, and will get you going, and you can modify these scripts rather than having to start completely from scratch. So we hope that these things are going to be complementary to what's already out there. They're not going to be replicating things. They can maybe build on some of the training courses that are being provided by ADR UK as a next step for someone who's interested in accessing Leo. But we'd really love to hear from you as to what else you would like. Maybe you don't think we should be focusing on Leo. Maybe there's other things that you think would be useful. Maybe there's more that you would like, specifically in terms of the scripts that you're interested in. We'd love to hear from you. Let us know. I think that is all from me. I am going to skip over the fellowships for now, and I'll hand you back to Jude just to introduce the last session.
Thank you so much, Neha and Natasha, for your contributions. They're very interesting, and quite a lot going on in the chat that we will need to pick up on afterwards. So in this sort of last session, what I'm pleased to hand over to Lucy and Karen from the other Community Catalyst project, who will introduce themselves and also their project, which focuses on children at risk of poor outcomes. So over to you, Lucy.
Thanks, Jude. Apologies from Karen, so you just had me this morning, but thank you to the Youth Transitions team for the opportunity to showcase the other Community Catalyst project, which was funded by ADR, which focuses on children and young people supported by early intervention services or children's social care across the UK. So my name is Lucy Griffiths. I'm a professor of paediatric epidemiology at Swansea University. I'm co-leading the project with Karen Broadhurst, who's based at Lancaster University, and you can see here that we have, or that we work with academics from Sussex, Imperial and UCL as well, so a good rounded team. And I should also mention that we are co-funded by foundations. So what are we trying to change in relation to children's social care research, which uses admin data? So through ADR, we're making major progress in making available national data sets to work with this, to work within this area, but we feel that more can be done. It's a rapidly changing knowledge landscape through all of the kind of funding initiatives that have become available in recent years, such as the ADR fellowships and ADR funded PhDs, etc. But we felt that there was that a lot of the work that was ongoing across the UK was quite fragmented. Researchers were grappling with the different data sets in a fairly isolated way, and so we felt that there was a better need to, or more of a need to bring together this community, which will enhance then the research that's being carried out, and also then to facilitate better pathways to impact. Next slide, please. So our first work package, much like the Youth and Transitions team, has been to really get to grips with what's already been done. So we've conducted an evidence review of all literature published since the year 2000. You can imagine that this is kind of rapidly increased in more recent years. So we looked at published literature and also the grey literature. We've also held a national stakeholder consultation, so with nearly 40 interviews across the UK, and then we held an expert roundtable event to share our findings and to help us develop our research agenda. And so we're currently preparing our foundations and ADR publications, and we hope to publish them before Christmas. Next slide, please. So the purpose of our research agenda is to enable researchers to deliver cross-sector evidence about children's pathways through services and outcomes, and to really deliver evidence that interrogates and informs earlier intervention and prevention, as we found this was a real evidence gap. Importantly, to enable those working in this area to collaborate to produce evidence in both research design as well as analysis, and in terms of research design, specifically around evaluations. So that was a clear gap. But also in the use of both national and regional data assets as well. And then to accelerate the use of the ADR flagship data sets for particularly neglected topics as well. So I don't have time this morning to outline our research agenda, but the themes listed here are the areas that we found that we'd like to prioritise in terms of our research agenda. And our research agenda then also outlines additional data set requirements to address these areas, and also there's kind of some of the challenges that we're still facing as well. Next slide, please. So we're also trying to build this community, so an inclusive community of practice. We've also developed now our programme of events for 2025. We've run some events so far, for example, a webinar on eChild, and we've been running the Children's Social Care Data User Group, which is led by Nikki Luke, Jenny Woodman and Lisa Holmes. And so we are, on top of those, we are developing plans for expert-led sessions on the different data sets, and webinars on the research agenda, and then methods workshops as well. And we'll also have an ADR microsite where we can then deposit all relevant training materials and resources, case studies and publications, etc. Thank you, Richard. And so some of these webinars and events will focus on the flagship data sets that are listed here. And we very much aim to not replicate anything that youth transitions are doing or ADR are doing, but really to have complementary activities to support use of these data sets for research related to children's social care. Next slide, please. And finally, we have we received funding for a fellow for an 18-month contract. So we now have a new research fellow working at UCL, and he's working on the eChild data set and is starting to look at some of the areas that we've identified in our work package 1. And he's being supported or supervised by Professor Katie Harron. So we will be publishing data insights, articles and blogs as well. Next slide, please. So for more information, you can see the ADR website here. Our microsite is forthcoming, but hopefully that will be within the next few months as well. And if you can, if you'd like to join our community, then the QR code is here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lucy. That's very helpful. And Lucy, there was actually a question that came in for you while you're talking. I don't know if you saw it. Will you be holding a similar event to this one for your catalyst? Is there a mailing list we can join where you've answered the last question?
Yeah, so we also hope to bring together sort of an expert working group. So please use the QR code to join that list. We're not having a launch event per se like this one, but we will be holding a webinar in the new year to showcase our research agenda. I'll also put my, oh no, that's fine. I think the best way to contact me would be to use the QR code, and I'll put the link in the chat as well again.
Super. Thank you very much, Lucy. Okay, so look, thanks very much, everyone. We're nearing the end of our event now. I hope you've learned a lot about our project on youth transitions, and you will, as Neha sort of set out and other speakers, be keen to join our research community and actively contribute to new research and insights, as well as you know, sharing what you're doing and what have you, and help us to develop capacity and capability within this area, and also to Lucy's Catalyst group. I post this event, what we'll be doing is we're reflecting on all the feedback you've given us in the workshop, so breakout groups, etc. And following up any stuff in the chat. We'll get in touch in the next few weeks with further information of upcoming events and resources, including our web pages, which will contain lots of helpful links and information, including recording of this event, actually. And we'll deal with any questions, as I say, that we haven't answered today that came in the Q&A or in the chat. Yes, so all that's kind of left now is to sort of thank you all for coming along to our event, and particularly those who have stayed through the whole 2 hours. Hope it all made sense, and you can see the need for this project. I'd like to say thank to all our speakers as well, particularly to Sarah and Eden, who I think really sort of brought to life why this is such an important project. And thanks also to the team behind the scenes who have helped to plan this event and make it actually happen. So that's great. Thank you very much, and we hope to continue to work with you as we take this important project forward. Good day.